Hello, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. I also happen to be chairman of the Collin County Republican Party, but tonight we had a Plano City Council meeting. Tomorrow night we'll have a Collin County Republican Party Executive Committee meeting. But tonight at Plano City Council meeting, first we made appointments to the Bond Referendum Citizen Advisory Committee. So these were 8 appointments that the council made unilaterally, 1 per each council member. And the Bond Referendum Citizen Advisory Committee, or as I like to call it, the BRCAC, because that just flows, doesn't it? BRCAC, say it with me, BRCAC. It's gratifying, isn't it? They will meet for about 5 months, and they will review the some $700 million worth of proposed projects that'll be put in front of it by city staff. This is down from about 1.6 billion, if I remember correctly, on the full list of potential projects. We're not doing that. But the BRCAC will review the 700 million some odd projects and prioritize them. And I want them to also ascertain whether a given project is even needed in the next 4 years until the next bond referendum cycle. So to take a little bit of a tangent, we currently spend about $20+ million a year just in interest on our debt. These are the bonds that we've issued. That's what debt, municipal bonds are, is debt. And many of those bonds are used to pay for items that are now maintenance, like our roads. You might have noticed that we're doing a little bit of maintenance on Parker Road, and you could have blinked and missed it, but good news, we're about to do the same thing to Park. So sarcasm over. But anyway, the BRCAC will look and see what is truly needed now. And I would like to try to move as many of our expenses, which are truly maintenance oriented, as possible away from the debt portion of our tax rate over to the maintenance portion of our tax rate. These are treated separately under state law. The debt portion, which is called the interest and sinking portion, and the maintenance portion, which is more intuitively called the maintenance and operations portion. I would like to make that as predictable as possible over time, as we have to maintain everything we've built, so that we can recoup as much of that $20 million a year in interest as possible, because presumably, and that was based on our last bond issuance or a bond referendum almost 4 years ago, which was less than $400 million. So may almost double that amount, and in a time when inflation is much higher, interest rates are much higher. So we could be spending about $50 million a year in interest on our debt. I would like to take as much of that money as possible and put it back into maintaining all of our stuff, our water lines, sewer lines, roads, etc. So next we moved on to adopting the council calendar for the next year. We have a lot of holidays, observances, religious holidays, etc., that we're trying to navigate council meetings around. So we were able to pass that. And lastly, we had an update on the, pun fully intended, the Great Update Rebate Program. So if you're unaware, this is a program which uses tax dollars, your tax dollars, to provide grants to homeowners in homes that are older than a certain age to provide certain updates. Now, traditionally, there are a number of ways that that money can be used. The idea is you pony up a certain amount of money and the city will grant you some extra money to do the project, to keep the homes updated. Now, if you've heard me talk about property tax abatements, then you know that I don't like the idea that you can update your property so that it's valued higher, and then you get punished for updating your property with a higher tax bill when it doesn't cost the city a dime. So the Great Update Rebate might model this in part, except that until these changes, which I'll discuss in a moment, you could use the Great Update Rebate to update your countertops. That's something that the Central Appraisal District is never going to incorporate into the valuation of your house, because they don't actually come knocking on everybody's doors every year and poke around the house and saying, what kind of countertops you have? Is that quartz? It's just not a thing. And so we have made some notable changes to the program. The Great Update Rebate We're going to change it to exterior upgrades and mobility upgrades only. So exterior may actually include things that you can't actually see from satellite photos or even from the street, like water lines, iron pipes, etc. It's still technically exterior, okay? And that can cause really big problems if unaddressed. It has to be owner-occupied only. Before, it could be for a rental home. And so now, owner-occupied only, and with a maximum of a $5,000 rebate. So if somebody's making changes to their property, making updates such that it increases the value of their home or provides some critical repairs for older homes, then they can get that rebate up to $5,000. There's a formula applied and everything. And so if the property is going to be appraised higher by the Central Appraisal District and they're going to get hit with a higher tax bill, that at least will help offset that. Simultaneously, though, we are looking into a kind of a grant program that isn't just applicable to older homes, but small businesses and homes who want to update their property that would flat out result in a taxable valuation increase so that people hypothetically, ideally, aren't penalized for improving their property. So we moved on to the regular meeting. The first item was a zoning request by Archgate Montessori Academy. So in one of my first meetings on council after you elected me in 2019, thank you again, by the way, this was the longest council meeting anybody could remember. It went until nearly 2 a.m. Now, the SUP request, specific use permit request by Archgate at that meeting was highly contentious, but it wasn't the only highly contentious thing on the docket. So it wasn't like that's what drove us to nearly 2 a.m. However, an SUP is a zoning tool that says, okay, you can operate most things within this zoning, but if you want to do certain extra things, then you need additional permission via the SUP, specific use permit. And in this case, Archgate Montessori was originally set up as a daycare in 2004. And that's when they got the original zoning request. But they wanted an SUP in order to additionally have it function as a private school. So private schools in the state of Texas don't need additional licensing, but for zoning purposes, they did need the SUP to operate the school. And so it was a pretty contentious matter. At that meeting in 2019, the compromise was struck to issue a temporary SUP to give the homeowners who opposed it in the surrounding area and the school additional time to come to terms and work out their differences. Both Councilman Anthony Riccadelli and I got involved to mediate some discussions. We didn't have to mediate too many before they took care of the rest on their own. And so when the SUP expiration was coming up at the end of that school year, we were now into 2020 and the pandemic, it passed without issue, with no complaint. So a couple of the biggest provisions of the compromise, the limitations on that SUP, were that the school had to be capped at no more than 308 students of any sort, daycare or private school, and that the private school would not be able to have more than 60 students, period. And that no changes to this would be requested for 5 years. Well, this was passed, and all these stipulations were put into the temporary version in 2019, and you might have noticed the world changed a little bit the next year. But 5 years later, they were asking tonight for an expansion to 360 students, which is a 16 change percent increase on the original cap of 308 students, and also to lift the restriction for private school students. Now, they have different class sizes for daycare and at different levels of elementary and middle school. So, and it's limited to middle school, by the way. So they were requesting to raise that limit to 360 total students and eliminate the cap on specifically private school students. Now, they said they very well may never reach 360 students, and so a motion was made to raise it to 330 students as kind of a compromise, because some of the homeowners did still oppose this. To be fair to the school, the homeowners were citing the compromise that was struck in 2019 and not making mention of the fact that as part of that deal, they wouldn't request any changes for 5 years. Well, it has been 5 years, and what a tumultuous 5 years it's been. So that motion for the 330 cap failed. I did vote in favor of that at first, but then the vote was taken to pass the SUP update as requested. So the restriction on 60 private school students was lifted, and the total cap of students of any sort was raised to 360. And again, that was like a 16.7 some odd % increase from the previous cap, which they haven't even hit that cap yet. But it was the limitation on the private school students that was hurting them, because they were already full with private school, just because, hey, the world's changed a little bit. And they had kindergartners who they were having to deny moving into first grade because they were capacity limited. But that's not going to be an issue now. Next, we moved on to the 2024-25 action plan, which is a requirement to be a recipient of HUD funds, Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. We get about $2.2 million a year, the city does, from HUD, which is supposed to be used toward low-income housing, homelessness, etc., and community development. In fact, the funds from HUD come in two forms. CDBG funds, that stands for Community Development Block Grant, which is what we're going to focus on here primarily, and home funds. So the action plan is something we have to produce every year to say how we are going to use the HUD money. And increasingly, first, I think Plano should not be a HUD recipient. First, I think there are too many strings attached at the federal level. And second, a community like Plano, we can take care of our problems ourselves and do it much better than being told how to do it by a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., period. However, enough people still think we need that $2.2 million, which is your dollars anyway. It's all taxpayer money in the end. It doesn't matter whether it's taken out of your pocket by the city or the county or the state or the federal government. It's still taken out of your pocket, and that's what you really care about. But I digress. So the big issue I have is with the use of CDBG funds. Now, this is where the lion's share of that $2.2 million goes, and there are a number of ways in which this can be used, but overwhelmingly, we use it for housing rehab. This can take the form of kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the Great Update Rebates program. We can make either critical repairs, foundation, water pipes, etc., to people who are elderly or lower income households. But also what we do a lot is actually buy properties, buy homes, rehabilitate them, renovate them, and then flip them. Now, we don't sell them to investors or just any old person. We have to sell them to lower income individuals. But I don't think this is the wisest use of that money to the extent that we're going to be getting that money anyway. I am a big believer when it comes to homelessness that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because once you tip into homelessness, it's a lot harder to get out of it. And there are issues that go hand in hand with homelessness, such as drug use and mental illness, which get exacerbated once you're homeless. So I would like to see all, or at least most of that money put into homelessness prevention, which can take a variety of forms. But we are at the tail end of our strategic plan, which is a multi-year plan that we have to produce. And we're about to start creating our new strategic plan. So that was one of the things we determined tonight, is that we're going to take a very close look at how we're using those funds from the CDBG and the home funds and the grants in order to best address the needs of our community and ideally prevent homelessness rather than address it or throw dollars at it after the fact. Which unfortunately, it's always going to be an issue. There will always be some level of homelessness in almost any community. And preventing it, I think, is by far the wisest thing we can do. Preventing it to the degree possible is by far the wisest thing we could do. So then we moved into a substantial amendment to the 2019-2020 action plan. So this included an infusion of funds that were extra funds, which were only usable for coronavirus-related things. But we didn't have enough demand for it. So we still have $865,000 left over. And so Councilman Riccadelli and Councilman Horn got together and determined that the best use for these under the allowable areas to use those funds would be to rehabilitate houses that are basically, they're not houses that we're going to flip, but they're used as temporary shelters or rehabilitation homes, like human rehabilitation, not rehabilitating the house. And so that money will be put to good use there. And lastly, we covered a renegotiated, or we had this first public hearing. We'll have a second public hearing coming up for a renegotiated franchise agreement for CoServ Electric. CoServ serves about 10% of the city of Plano's electric. The remainder is served by Encore. And the franchise agreement, there are a lot of other details to it, but basically we'll be charging 4% of the total for the franchise fees to CoServ. That is it. We do have another meeting. If you're watching this on Tuesday, I'm recording it Monday night. If you're watching it on Tuesday, then we have another council meeting tomorrow. That is Wednesday, July 24th, not August 24th. July 24th, we're going to have the preview of the next fiscal year's budget. We're not taking any action at that meeting. This is just the preview of the proposed budget and the CIP, Community Investment Program. So thank you for watching. This turned out to be a little lengthier than I anticipated, but I appreciate you sticking with it if you've made it this far. I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. Thank you and God bless.